The truth did not arrive gently. It tore its way through lives that had already been stretched thin by suspicion, resentment, and long-buried secrets. Bill's death had once been framed as a cruel twist of fate, a sudden collapse that left grief in its wake and unanswered questions hanging in the air. Over time, those questions hardened into obsessions, especially for those who had sensed that something about his final days did not add up. The revelation that Hayley had poisoned him did not merely reopen old wounds, it detonated them, forcing every character involved to confront their own anger, guilt, and complicity. Hayley's internal world was a battlefield long before the crime itself. Years of feeling overlooked, manipulated, and emotionally cornered had carved deep fractures in her sense of self. She had lived in the shadow of Bill's power, his influence shaping every room he entered, every decision that followed. To the outside world, she appeared composed, even restrained, but beneath that surface simmered a fury that had never been given permission to exist openly. Each slight, whether real or perceived, fed a narrative in her mind that justified retaliation. By the time she chose poison as her weapon, the act felt to her less like murder and more like reclaiming control in a life where she believed none had ever truly belonged to her. Yet the moment Bill died, control slipped through her fingers. What followed was not relief, but a relentless tightening of fear. Every interaction became a test, every glance a potential threat. Hayley's anger did not dissipate, it turned inward, transforming into paranoia and self-loathing. She was trapped between the belief that Bill had deserved his fate and the inescapable reality that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. This contradiction hollowed her out, leaving her oscillating between defiance and dread. Her decisions grew sharper, colder, driven not by strategy but by survival, each choice pushing her further into isolation. The people around her were not innocent bystanders to this descent. Those closest to Bill were forced to re-examine their own relationships with him and with Hayley through the harsh lens of his death. Anger manifested differently in each of them. Some felt betrayed, not only by Hayley's actions, but by their own failure to see the danger she posed. Others were consumed by guilt, haunted by moments when they had dismissed her distress as exaggeration or manipulation. These emotions clashed violently, creating an environment where trust evaporated and every alliance felt temporary. One figure in particular was driven by a corrosive mix of grief and rage. Bill's absence left a void that could not be filled, and the need for accountability became an obsession. This character's anger was not loud or explosive, but methodical, sharpening into a quiet determination to uncover the truth at any cost. Each discovery peeled back another layer of deception, not just about the poisoning, but about the tangled relationships that had surrounded Bill for years. The realization that Hayley's crime had been enabled by collective silence was devastating, forcing this character to confront the uncomfortable truth that justice would implicate more than one person. As the investigation closed in, the tension intensified. Hayley found herself increasingly cornered, her carefully constructed facade cracking under pressure. She made reckless decisions, attempting to redirect suspicion and maintain control, but these efforts only deepened the web of lies. Her anger flared outward again, manifesting in acts of emotional cruelty and calculated manipulation. She justified each move as necessary, yet the consequences grew heavier, dragging others down with her. Friends became liabilities, confidants became potential enemies, and every relationship was tainted by the fear of exposure. The turning point came when the evidence could no longer be ignored. What had once been fragments of doubt solidified into undeniable proof. The confrontation with this reality was brutal, stripping away any remaining illusions. Hayley's internal conflict reached its peak, as the narrative she had built to survive collided with the irreversible truth of her actions. The weight of Bill's death pressed down on her, not as a single moment of violence, but as an endless echo of cause and effect. She was forced to acknowledge that her anger, while rooted in genuine pain, had metastasized into something monstrous. For those seeking justice, the confirmation of Hayley's guilt brought no peace. The exposure of the crime unleashed a secondary wave of destruction, unraveling relationships and reputations alike. Long-standing loyalties fractured as people were forced to choose between protecting themselves and standing by the truth. The sense of betrayal was profound, particularly for those who had defended Hayley, believing her capable of cruelty but not murder. Their anger turned inward, manifesting as shame and self-reproach, as they grappled with the realization that they had been complicit in maintaining a lie. The legal process itself became a crucible, amplifying every emotion. As the details of the poisoning emerged, stripped of any romanticized justification, the act was laid bare in its full brutality. Hayley's anger, once her shield, now offered no protection. Instead, it became evidence of her instability, her inability to process conflict without resorting to destruction. The verdict, when it came, was not a surprise, but its finality was crushing. 20 years in prison was more than a sentence. It was a declaration that the harm she had inflicted could never be undone. In the aftermath, the characters left behind were forced to rebuild within the ruins of their former lives. Bill's absence continued to shape them, not as a static memory, but as an evolving presence that influenced every decision. Some sought redemption, attempting to atone for their failures by embracing transparency and accountability. Others hardened, allowing bitterness to calcify into a permanent state of being. The knowledge that Hayley would spend 2 decades behind bars did little to ease their pain. Instead, it served as a constant reminder of how easily unresolved anger could spiral into irreversible loss. Hayley's own reckoning did not end with the prison gates closing behind her. Isolation stripped away the last remnants of her self-deception, leaving her alone with the full weight of her choices. Anger no longer provided clarity or strength. It became a dull, persistent ache, intertwined with regret. She was forced to confront the reality that while Bill's death had ended one chapter of suffering, it had opened countless others, extending far beyond herself. The years ahead loomed as a slow reckoning, each day a reminder that the moment she chose poison over restraint had defined her legacy. The story ultimately became one of collision between rage and reason, pain and accountability, love and betrayal. Every character was pushed to their limits, forced to make decisions under unbearable pressure. Some emerged changed, others broken, but none untouched. The crime was not an isolated act of violence. It was the culmination of countless small failures, ignored warnings, and unspoken resentments. In the end, the gates that closed were not only those of the prison, but the emotional boundaries that once crossed could never truly be restored.